The ballroom glowed like a jewel trapped in winter glass, its chandeliers scattering white fire across silks, pearls, and polished boots. Yet beneath the glitter, a chill threaded through the air, an unspoken warning that something cruel was about to unfold. Lady Evelina Harrow sensed it the moment she stepped onto the marble floor, her breath catching as every head turned, not in admiration, but in calculated curiosity. She adjusted the pale gloves on her trembling hands, lifted her chin, and moved with the grace expected of a duchess, though she felt anything but one. Whispers rose before she made it halfway across the room. They rustled like dry leaves, brittle and cutting. "The Duchess arrives alone again," someone murmured behind a fan. "He won't even escort her publicly," another replied. Evelina kept her gaze forward, pretending she did not hear the words that pressed like cold fingers along the back of her neck. She had told herself she was prepared for the judgment that forever shadowed her marriage, but tonight the weight of it settled deeper, scraping against a bruise that had never healed. The Duke stood near the far wall, tall and composed, a dark figure amid swirling color and sound. Adrian Blackwell looked carved from winter itself, precise features, unreadable eyes, and a posture that held the room in quiet command. Conversation softened around him, not out of warmth, but out of awe and fear. Even from a distance, Evelina felt the faint tug in her chest that had drawn her to him from the first day they met. She had once mistaken it for hope. He did not look at her as she approached. Perhaps he did not mean to wound her with that indifference, but it struck all the same, a blade sliding with practiced ease. She stopped before him, her breath shallow. "Your Grace." At last his eyes shifted toward her, cool and distant. "Duchess." The word sounded like something borrowed, something he intended to return at the earliest opportunity. Trying to ignore the sudden hush of the crowd watching them, Evelina offered the faintest smile. "The orchestra has begun the first waltz. I thought—" "You thought I might dance with you." He did not bother to lower his voice. His tone traveled across the polished floor, caught by the eager ears around them. "That would be unwise." Heat stung her cheeks, and for a breath she considered stepping away. She had endured coldness, endured silence, endured days when he barely acknowledged her existence. But rejection served to an audience was a cruelty she had not anticipated tonight. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I am your wife." A ripple of tension swept the room. Adrian's expression did not shift. "You are a duchess by arrangement. Nothing more. Do not mistake title for intimacy." His gaze dropped briefly to her gloved hands, then lifted again with honed detachment. "You will never be my true duchess." Gasps broke around them like shattering glass. Someone let a glove fall. Someone else turned away as though to grant her privacy she did not truly have. Evelina felt the words slice cleanly, leaving her standing intact but hollowed, as though her ribs had been quietly removed. For a long moment she looked at him, her eyes stinging though she refused to let tears form. The man before her had once shown glimmers of something gentler, a softness in the way he watched the sunrise, a fleeting warmth when he believed no one else noticed. She had clung to those fragments, thinking they were pieces of a heart she might someday reach. Perhaps she had been a fool. Perhaps he had none left. "I see," she murmured. Her voice did not break. She offered a perfect curtsy, spine straight, head bowed in dignity she refused to surrender. Then she turned from him, each step echoing with the finality of a closing door. The crowd parted for her, some out of pity, others out of fascination with the spectacle she unwillingly provided. Evelina kept her gaze fixed ahead, but every whisper slid under her skin. Poor thing! What did she expect? A common-born girl cannot warm a nobleman's heart. He should have married someone equal. Each comment tightened the ache in her chest, pressing against the memory of the vows she had taken with trembling hope. She reached the terrace doors, pushing them open into the cold evening. Rain shimmered outside like a curtain of silver needles, and the night air rushed to meet her, sharp enough to steal her breath. For a moment she stood beneath the archway, letting the chill anchor her. The world inside pulsed with music and laughter she no longer wished to hear. Stepping into the rain, Evelina welcomed the wash of cold water on her face. It felt honest in a way the ballroom never had. The droplets clung to her lashes and darkened the edges of her gown, but she did not care. She needed the sky's touch more than she needed shelter. Out here, there were no titles, no expectations, no eyes measuring her worth. She moved toward the stone railing overlooking the gardens, where lanterns flickered faintly through the storm. She imagined the roses bowing under the rain, their fragile petals enduring what they must. She envied them their quiet resilience. A flash of movement caught her eye. Through the terrace doors, Adrian stood watching her, his expression unreadable. The rain blurred his silhouette, but she sensed a tension in the way he gripped the doorframe, as though something in him fought to move forward, or to turn away. He did neither. Evelina inhaled, rain-laced air filling her lungs. "So be it," she whispered to the storm. "If I cannot be his true Duchess, I will become something else. Something he cannot ignore." Her hands curled at her sides, not with anger, but with resolve. When she turned back toward the doors, Adrian was gone, and the rain fell harder, as though urging her to begin. The morning dawned upon Blackwell Hall with a muted silver light that filtered through the tall, frost-framed windows, touching the polished floors and gilded moldings with an almost reluctant grace. Evelina Harrow rose quietly, leaving the warmth of her bed behind, though her heart still carried the echo of the Duke's cruel declaration from the night before. "You will never be my true Duchess." The words had sunk like ice into her chest, leaving her simultaneously hollowed and strangely awake. She dressed in a muted gown of dusty blue, its soft silk catching the pale light, choosing not to attract attention but not to disappear either. Every fold, every careful tuck of fabric was a statement of resolve, a shield against the world's gaze. She examined her reflection, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the faint crease of determination around her mouth. Beauty mattered less than courage now. Before leaving her chambers, she opened the small wooden box she kept tucked in the drawer of her writing desk. Within lay a collection of tokens, each seemingly trivial yet filled with memories she cherished quietly: a pressed violet from the West Garden, a ribbon dropped by a frightened servant, a fragment of glass from a forgotten greenhouse. Each held proof of her presence in a house that had never fully welcomed her. Today, she selected the violet, now faded to a dusky gray but still perfect in shape. Carefully, she slid it into an envelope and wrote the Duke's name upon it. It was neither a plea nor a declaration of love. It was simply a reminder that even the smallest things endured beyond neglect or cruelty. Descending the grand staircase, Evelina felt the weight of the household's attention. Servants watched her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, still whispering about last night's humiliation. The Duke's sharp rebuke had not remained contained. It had seeped through the halls and corridors, sparking conversations behind fans, murmurs in kitchens, and cautious glances across the drawing rooms. Yet Evelina did not falter. Each step she took was measured, a silent demonstration that she refused to break under scrutiny. The library doors opened before her, the room already filled with the quiet rustle of papers and the steady scratch of a quill. Adrian Blackwell stood near the tall windows, his figure outlined by the silver light, shoulders squared, demeanor unyielding. Evelina approached and placed the envelope carefully on the edge of his desk. "A token," she said softly, "no more, no less." He did not immediately acknowledge it, his gaze fixed outside the window. "You believe this will alter the distance between us?" he asked finally, voice low but edged with that familiar, cutting precision. "No," she replied calmly. "It is merely something I wished you to have." Before any further words could pass, a knock interrupted the tense silence. The housekeeper entered, her hands pressed together as if she were offering a prayer. "Your Grace, a letter arrived at the gate during the night. It is addressed to the household, and it concerns the Duchess." Evelina felt a chill creep along her spine, a cold whisper of anticipation. She extended her hand to receive it. The letter seal was already broken, revealing the delicate yet venomous script inside. It accused her of meeting a mysterious man in the orchard weeks before, implying scandal, impropriety, and betrayal. Evelina read it carefully, her chest tightening, and whispered the sender's name, Lady Ashcombe. She knew her rival's motives well. Disapproval had always followed her, sharpened by envy and contempt for the match forced upon her. Adrian's eyes darkened, the first sign that the scandal touched a nerve he rarely allowed to surface. "This will stain your reputation," he said, his voice taut with controlled anger. "My reputation was already under scrutiny," she replied quietly, lifting her chin, "and I will not cower from falsehoods." Another servant rushed in, clutching a second letter. Adrian snatched it and skimmed its contents, muttering a curse under his breath. This one was sent to the town papers. The rumors will spread by midday. Instead of crumpling beneath the weight of humiliation, Evelina felt a subtle, strengthening resolve. "Then I shall face them," she murmured, voice steady, almost defiant. Adrian studied her, the calmness in her tone unsettling. "You are under my protection," he said softly, a line that hinted at emotions he did not yet allow himself to name. She regarded him with quiet astonishment. "You told me I could never be your true Duchess," she said. His gaze flickered momentarily. "Protection and sentiment are not the same," he replied. A third knock interrupted the charged quiet. The butler appeared, pale and hesitant. "Your Grace, there is a man at the door. He claims he knows the Duchess." Evelina's breath caught. Adrian stepped closer, a protective shadow, his tension radiating in measured steps. "What man?" "He gave no name," the butler said. "Only that he traveled far to reach you." Evelina's pulse quickened as she walked beside the Duke toward the entrance hall. The marble reflected the muted light of morning, the echo of their footsteps sharp and deliberate. Standing at the doorway was a tall man, dripping with mist, head bowed respectfully. When he lifted it, recognition sparked in her chest. Thomas Merrick, the steward's son from her childhood home, had returned after years of absence. "Lady Evelina," he said, voice steady but urgent. "Forgive my intrusion. I bring urgent news." Adrian's dark gaze sharpened. "You came unannounced?" Thomas met his eyes without flinching. "The matter required haste. Lady Evelina's past has been stirred, and those who would see her ruined are already in motion." Evelina stepped forward, heart pounding. "Thomas, why are you here?" "Because the shadow of someone long gone seeks to undo you, and they have begun already," he said, each word carrying weight, urgency, and an unspoken threat. The morning's quiet brilliance now seemed fractured, a delicate world about to tilt. The Duke's hands clenched at his sides, his composure taut. Evelina felt the first ripple of anticipation and fear intertwining, her pulse in rhythm with the storm of letters, accusations, and unexpected visitors. The day promised challenges that neither of them could yet fully grasp, and in that charged silence, she understood that the next steps would demand courage, cunning, and the subtle power she had only begun to claim. And as Thomas's gaze shifted toward her, unwavering and grave, Evelina realized the delicate balance of propriety, scandal, and defiance had begun, and there would be no turning back. The storm had begun in the hours before dusk, thick gray clouds rolling across the sky and rattling the leaded panes of Blackwell Hall. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of wet earth seeping through the open terrace doors, mingling with the faint perfume of roses from the conservatory. Evelina moved carefully through the corridors, her skirts whispering against the polished floorboards, aware that Adrian followed, silent and unyielding as a shadow. The events of the morning had left a residue of unease. Letters, rumors, and sudden appearances had unsettled her, but they had also drawn her and the Duke into close, unanticipated proximity. Tonight, necessity would force their connection into the open, away from the gaze of the judgmental household and gossiping town. They found themselves in the library when the storm's first rumbles shook the roof. The room was dimly lit by a single candelabra, the flames trembling as though afraid of the wind that pressed against the panes. Evelina pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped toward the hearth, where embers glowed weakly. The space felt intimate, almost conspiratorial, the way a room does when the outside world has become hostile and relentless. Adrian's eyes followed her movements, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her breath quickened in the draught. He did not speak at first, allowing the silence to stretch and stretch, filled only with the ticking of the grandfather clock and the occasional hiss of the wind. Evelina finally broke it. "The storm will ruin the roads," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "Travelers may be trapped. We should prepare for those seeking refuge." Adrian's brow furrowed. "And yet you move as though the world beyond these walls does not matter to you. You think only of others, even at your own discomfort." Her eyes met his, steady despite the thrum of unease in her chest. "It is not discomfort I fear," she replied. "It is indifference." For a moment he studied her closely, seeing not the fragile, polite Duchess he had dismissed in the ballroom, but someone forged from a different metal entirely, resilient, patient, and quietly defiant. The recognition unsettled him, stirring emotions he had carefully suppressed since their first encounter. "You speak as though my indifference is a choice," he said softly, almost unconsciously. "You do not know the walls I have built." "I know enough," she whispered, stepping closer, the candlelight painting her features with soft gold and shadow. "Enough to see that the walls are not unyielding. You fear being seen, and yet here I am." The tension between them was palpable, charged like the static in the air before lightning strikes. Adrian inhaled sharply, a hand brushing against the edge of the desk for balance. "You have no idea what you ask of me," he murmured. "To tear down everything I have built, even for a moment, would leave me vulnerable." Evelina placed a tentative hand on the chair beside him, a small but deliberate gesture of trust. "Vulnerability is not weakness," she said. "It is the measure of one's courage. Do you not wish to be seen, even once, for what you are?" He turned his gaze toward her, and for a brief second, the mask of aristocratic detachment slipped. She saw the faint quiver of restraint in his jaw, the way his hand flexed around the edge of the polished wood. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, threaded with unspoken weight. "I have watched you all morning," he admitted. "Every small act of kindness, every quiet decision, every defiance you have offered this household. I have been unsettled by it." Evelina's breath caught. "Unsettled," she repeated softly, a faint hope flickering at the edges of her chest. "Yes," he whispered, "because you are unlike any Duchess I have ever known. You see what others ignore. You act where I would hesitate. I cannot dismiss it, though I have tried." His gaze held hers, intense and searching, as though seeking to measure the truth in her eyes. "I do not understand why my heart is stirred by you. I do not allow it. And yet, I cannot ignore it." The vulnerability in his voice, the rare and startling admission, pulled something within Evelina. She stepped even closer, the candlelight framing them both in a fragile cocoon of warmth against the storm. "You are not the only one who fears," she said quietly. "I have feared your indifference from the very first day. I have feared that my presence would always be met with rejection, that my efforts, my very self, would remain invisible to you. And yet, here I am, unable to leave even when it would be simpler to vanish." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with emotion neither dared to name aloud. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rolling across the distant hills, echoing the tumult within the library. Adrian's hand lifted, almost imperceptibly, and brushed a stray lock of hair from Evelina's face. His touch was tentative, measured, yet carried the weight of a confession too dangerous to speak. "Do you not see?" she murmured, her voice breaking slightly, yet composed. "You may have believed I was here for titles or approval, for nothing more than duty. But I am here because I care. I have always cared, even when it seemed futile." He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, the words striking him with more force than any declaration of war or loyalty ever could. "Evelina," he breathed, and the sound of her name, rare and intimate, reverberated through her chest. "I have feared this. I have feared that to feel it all would betray the careful control I have maintained for years. And yet, I feel." Her hand touched his, fingers brushing the edge of his knuckles, a subtle, electrifying gesture of understanding. Neither spoke for several heartbeats, the storm outside mirroring the storm within. Every unspoken sentiment, every restrained emotion, hung between them, taut as a wire. "You are different," he whispered finally. "Not merely in action, but in spirit. And it terrifies me, because I do not know what to do with the longing you awaken in me." Evelina's lips quivered, but she held firm. "Then do not fight it," she said softly. "Acknowledge it, if only for a moment. Do not deny yourself the truth." The candelabra flickered violently as a gust of wind forced itself through the poorly sealed windows, casting shadows that danced across the walls and floor. Both of them inhaled sharply, the world outside and the world between them vibrating with tension, expectation, and unspoken admission. And just as Adrian's hand began to move, tentatively seeking hers in a more deliberate gesture, the distant toll of the hall clock announced the arrival of the hour. The sound echoed like a herald, a reminder of duty, propriety, and the outside world that waited to intrude upon the fragile intimacy they had forged. Evelina drew a quiet breath, her pulse still racing, and looked into his eyes. "We cannot hide forever," she said, voice a whisper that carried all the weight of hope and fear. Adrian's jaw tightened. "No," he admitted, a tremor of acknowledgment in his tone. "But perhaps, for tonight, we may exist as ourselves, if only in this room, away from all else." The storm rattled the panes, the candlelight flickered, and the library seemed to hold its breath. In that fleeting moment, a bridge had been built, delicate, tremulous, and frightening in its honesty, between two hearts long restrained by titles, fear, and unspoken pride. The morning light crept cautiously through the tall windows of Blackwell Hall, gilding dust motes in the air like tiny, hovering stars. Outside, the gardens were drenched from the night storm, each droplet clinging to petals and leaves as if reluctant to fall. Evelina moved through the corridors with a measured pace, her gown whispering over the polished stone, her mind tangled in the threads of the previous days. Letters, accusations, and clandestine visits had tightened the invisible web around her, yet tonight the tension had a different texture. It was the tension of unspoken truths threatening to surface, of walls crumbling in the presence of undeniable feeling. Adrian Blackwell awaited her in the private study, a room seldom used except for matters requiring absolute discretion. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and faint traces of leather-bound volumes, the faint golden glow of the hearth illuminating his sharp features. He had removed the rigid armor of aristocratic restraint that often marked his presence in public, revealing the man beneath the title, vulnerable, uncertain, yet compelling. Evelina's heart fluttered at the sight, both with anticipation and a lingering ache, for she knew the moment demanded courage on both sides. "I have discovered something," Adrian began, voice low, carrying the weight of sleepless nights. He gestured toward the large, ornate portrait on the wall, hidden partially behind the drapes. Evelina followed his gaze, and the image revealed itself, a woman of noble bearing, her eyes sorrowful yet proud, painted decades earlier, the beloved of Adrian's youth. The resemblance between her expression and the moments Adrian had often concealed in memory was unmistakable. Evelina's breath caught. "She betrayed you," she whispered, almost to herself. Adrian's jaw tightened. "She did. I loved her, with all the depth a man can give, and yet I was discarded for convenience, for wealth, for politics. I swore I would never allow myself to be hurt in such a manner again." His eyes, usually so guarded, lingered on Evelina with an intensity that made the very air between them tremble. "And yet, here you stand, not to betray, not to manipulate, but to challenge every carefully built wall I have erected." Evelina stepped closer, the hem of her gown brushing the edge of the rug, her heart hammering against the cage of her ribs. "I have never wished to be the instrument of your pain," she said softly, voice steady yet laced with emotion. "I sought only to serve with dignity, to act with kindness where it was due, to see what the world often ignores. And in doing so, I never imagined I would be seen, not by you." He took a deliberate step forward, the distance between them narrowing to a breath. "You do not understand the turmoil you have caused within me," he admitted, the words dropping like stones into a still pool. "I have watched, I have observed, I have condemned myself for feeling drawn to you in ways I did not permit myself to feel. Every glance you offered, every act of quiet defiance, tore at the walls I built to protect my heart." Evelina reached out tentatively, her hand hovering near the sleeve of his coat. "Then admit it," she whispered. "Admit that what you feel is no longer contained by propriety or pride. You need not deny it to preserve your dignity." Adrian's gaze met hers fully, the weight of years and suppression breaking through in the raw vulnerability reflected there. "I am unsettled," he confessed, the single word trembling with power. "Unsettled and aware that every effort to deny it has only drawn me closer to a truth I dared not acknowledge. You are not only part of my world, you are the world I have longed for and never known I could possess." Evelina's eyes glistened, the faintest tremor at the corner betraying the swell of hope she had fought to temper. "And yet," she asked softly, "you have allowed fear to govern your actions? All this time, you withheld the truth from me, fearing perhaps the consequences of surrendering to it." "I feared losing control," Adrian admitted, stepping closer, the warmth of his presence encroaching upon the fragile space she occupied. "I feared that allowing myself to care, to feel, would expose my weakness. And yet here you are, revealing a courage far greater than my own, challenging me to confront what I have long buried." The storm outside had diminished to a gentle patter, rain sliding down window panes, and in the quiet, the only sound was the soft intake of breath between them. Evelina's hand brushed his sleeve at last, tentative, seeking permission and offering herself in silent communion. "I have endured your indifference, Adrian," she murmured, voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. "I have endured whispers, letters, and scandal, and yet I stand before you not broken, but unwavering. Will you see me now, for who I am, and not merely the title I bear?" For a long, taut moment, he studied her, weighing every word, every gesture, every heartbeat. Then, slowly, deliberately, he took her hand in his, the warmth of his palm anchoring hers. "Evelina, forgive my blindness," he whispered, the admission carrying the force of a confession decades in the making. "I have been a fool, hiding behind pride, letting the world judge and misjudge what is most precious. You have shown me what courage truly is, and in doing so, you have changed me." Her lips quivered, though she held herself with composure, knowing that tears would betray nothing if she did not allow them. "And now?" she asked softly, the single word hanging between them, heavy with anticipation and hope. Adrian's eyes softened, the stoic mask melting entirely, leaving only a man moved to the core by truth and vulnerability. "Now," he said, "I ask you to allow me the honor of standing by your side, not in title only, but in spirit, in heart, in every manner that a man may offer himself. Will you permit me to prove that you are, and have always been, my true Duchess?" Evelina felt the world tilt gently, as if the very foundation of the estate had shifted to accommodate the fragile, luminous bridge they were building. "Yes," she breathed, a single word that carried years of patience, endurance, and quiet longing. "Yes, Adrian, I will." For a fleeting heartbeat, they simply stood there, hand in hand, hearts aligned yet trembling with the enormity of what had passed and what was to come. The candelabra flickered, shadows dancing across walls heavy with history, bearing witness to the revelation and the acknowledgement that had taken decades to manifest in this single, sacred moment. And yet, before the tension could fully resolve, a servant's hurried knock interrupted them, urgent and anxious. Adrian's brow knit as he stepped back slightly, releasing her hand only to glance toward the door. Evelina's heart sank a fraction, the fragile cocoon of honesty and intimacy now threatened by the outside world. Whatever awaited beyond that door promised consequences, perhaps public, perhaps personal, but it was undeniable that the moment they had forged would be tested. Adrian's eyes met hers again, steel and tenderness interwoven. "Stay close," he said, a low command and a plea entwined. And as she nodded, understanding the weight of unspoken threats, the study seemed to contract, holding them in a tense embrace that balanced hope and forewarning, leaving the resolution of their private confession poised on the precipice of the unknown. The night had fallen over Blackwell Hall like a velvet curtain, heavy and suffused with the scent of damp earth and wet stone. The gardens glistened beneath the pale illumination of lanterns, droplets clinging to every rose and ivy leaf, reflecting light like scattered diamonds. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, each tick of the clock echoing against the walls, marking the approach of a moment that would decide more than reputation. It would decide hearts. Evelina moved with careful precision through the halls, her gown a whisper of silk and courage, her pulse a steady drumbeat of determination. She had faced whispers, letters, scandal, and rejection, yet tonight, the culmination of her endurance and Adrian's hidden turmoil would collide in a single, irrevocable confrontation. Adrian awaited her in the great ballroom, the space now stripped of music and frivolity, left only with the imposing grandeur of crystal chandeliers, polished marble, and the silent witness of history etched into every gilded surface. His dark coat contrasted sharply with the gleaming room, his presence commanding yet vulnerable in the intimate quiet. The storm from earlier had passed, leaving only a drizzle that tapped against the windows like a muted applause, acknowledging the drama that was about to unfold. Evelina's eyes met his across the polished floor, and in that glance, decades of pride, misunderstanding, and restrained longing converged. "You came," he said, voice low, a mixture of surprise and relief lacing the words. "I feared the hour would find you elsewhere, retreating into propriety or caution." "I came because it is time," she replied, her tone steady, eyes unwavering. "Time to face truth, to confront the consequences, and to claim what has long been denied." She stepped forward, the echo of her gown announcing each deliberate movement, and he mirrored her stride, the distance between them shrinking with each step, charged with unspoken tension. Adrian's hand lifted, almost unconsciously, hovering near hers, uncertain yet yearning. "Evelina." "The world will watch," he said, voice a quiet tremor. "Every glance, every whisper, will be scrutinized, judged, dissected. And yet, you risk yourself, and me, in this declaration." "I do," she said simply. "For too long, I have endured the half-truths, the cold indifference, the facades we were expected to maintain. If hearts are to be bound by duty, then let ours be bound by truth." The chandeliers flickered as if in response, the candlelight casting dancing shadows that mirrored the turbulence in the room. Adrian's chest tightened, his gaze searching hers for any hint of doubt, yet finding none. Courage radiated from Evelina like heat from embers, steadfast and unyielding. For the first time, he allowed himself to inhale freely, the weight of years pressing upon him while simultaneously lifting. He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence brushing against hers, bridging the chasm of pride and fear. "You are remarkable," he admitted, the single word tremulous with meaning. "Not merely in your endurance, but in the very essence of your being. You have shattered walls I thought unbreakable, and in doing so, you have laid my heart bare." Evelina's hand rose, tentative, then pressed into his, a deliberate touch that carried both invitation and trust. "And you," she whispered, "have finally seen me, not as a title, nor a duty, nor a shadow of expectation, but as I am. Will you honor that vision, Adrian?" He closed the distance fully, eyes dark with intensity, hands enclosing hers. "I will," he said, voice trembling with the enormity of surrender. "I will honor it with every breath I take, with every moment I am granted. You are my truth, Evelina, my revelation, and my heart." The room seemed to pulse around them, the chandeliers catching the reflection of their joined hands, the marble absorbing the silence between breaths. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. No scandal, no whispers, no judgment could penetrate the intimate universe they had forged, a universe born of resilience, courage, and unspoken yearning now allowed to speak aloud. A sudden rustle at the entrance drew their attention, a servant whispering urgently, but neither moved immediately. The moment was too fragile, too sacred, to be shattered by routine interruption. Adrian's gaze never left hers, and Evelina found herself leaning slightly closer, the warmth of proximity speaking volumes the tongue could not express. "Evelina," he murmured, voice low, steady yet laden with emotion, "you must know, my prior indifference, my coldness, was never a reflection of disregard for you. It was a fortress built from fear, pride, and the memory of past betrayal. I did not anticipate the force with which your presence would overturn all of that." Her lips quivered slightly, and yet she held herself, grounding the surge of feeling with the strength that had carried her through ridicule and isolation. "And now," she asked softly, "what will remain when the walls have fallen?" "Now," he said, drawing her closer, "everything that is real remains. Nothing false, nothing ornamental, nothing constrained by expectation. Only us. Only truth. Only what I have denied myself for so long." The tension broke in a quiet exhale, a culmination of suppressed desire, pride, and the culmination of whispered promises made to themselves and to the empty rooms of Blackwell Hall. Evelina allowed herself a single controlled step forward, closing the final inches between them. Their hands remained entwined, but the world seemed to tilt in acknowledgment of the alignment of their hearts. And then, as if to test the permanence of their revelation, a sudden gust rattled the tall windows, scattering candlelight and sending shadows darting across the walls like specters of doubt. The front doors of the ballroom creaked open, admitting a figure both unexpected and urgent. Thomas Merrick, steadfast and wary, appeared on the threshold, the damp cloak clinging to him like a second skin. His eyes met Evelina's, wide with urgency and unspoken warning. "Lady Evelina," he called, voice low but insistent. "There is news, grave news that demands your attention." Adrian's grip tightened slightly, yet he did not release her hand. "What is it?" he asked, voice firm, though his eyes flickered with tension. "The accusations are spreading faster than anticipated," Thomas explained, "and someone is orchestrating a confrontation that cannot be ignored. It comes from within the city, a threat to the estate and to your standing, one that demands immediate reckoning." Evelina's pulse surged, but she did not falter. "Then we face it," she said, resolute, voice unwavering. "Not as Duchess and Duke constrained by rumor or fear, but as ourselves. Together." Adrian's dark eyes softened, and he drew her even closer, a silent affirmation of unity. "Together," he echoed. The storm's residue tapped insistently against the panes, the faint patter a rhythm for the courage that now surged between them. Hand in hand, heart aligned with heart, they stepped toward the threshold, ready to meet whatever waited beyond. For the first time, the Duke and Duchess of Blackwell Hall were not merely figures in a title or scandal, but living, breathing embodiments of truth, defiance, and love unrestrained. And as the lantern light reflected in their eyes, mingling with the fading shadows of uncertainty, Evelina felt a pulse of exhilaration. The night would demand courage. The world would test them. Yet for the first time, she believed that no letter, no whisper, no scandal could undo the declaration made in the quiet sanctuary of their shared resolve. Their hearts, once fragile and distant, now beat together with a rhythm unstoppable and undeniable, poised on the brink of a new beginning.